one you missed and really join, just hit the admit button.
Has it been 20 seconds? Live. I'm just testing. Can you still hear me? Yeah, okay, I'm live. Okay, perfect. Very good afternoon, morning, evening to you all, wherever in the world you are joining us from. Welcome to our panel discussion on preparing for the fourth industrial revolution. We're very grateful and thankful that you could join us. And I'm really pleased to moderate this forum. My name is Nimpine Mabunda. I currently lead the General Electric business in Southern Africa as the Chief Executive Officer. In my previous life, I was the executive in charge of digital transformation, big data, artificial intelligence, and fintech at a leading mobile operator across Africa. And I also consulted on digitalization as a senior advisor at the Boston Consulting Group. I am currently based in Johannesburg, although I'm a true African child, having worked across about 7 different markets in West Africa, East Africa, and Southern Africa, and also had the pleasure of living in Uganda for 3 years and the United Kingdom for 4 years. So I'm a global citizen. But today is not about me. I have the pleasure to facilitate, but really I am excited about the panel that we have that has graced us with our presence today. But before I introduce the panel, let me set the context for the conversation we are going to have. COVID-19 has shown us that when faced with a crisis, the world can digitalize very quickly. Indeed, many of us have done more online shopping than before. Stats says this more than doubled everywhere. Cashless payment has become a way of life. Virtual meetings like Teams and Zoom and so on. Online doctors or digital consulting, remote education. I can go on, but our lives have changed since COVID-19 from a lot more physical and contact to contactless and digital. However, COVID-19 has also exposed some weaknesses in the system, particularly in Africa, compared to many developed and developing nations, where gaps caused by insufficient infrastructure, think about connectivity, we don't have enough 4G coverage, not let alone 5G, lack of access, lack of right devices, lack of fixed fast broadband, no devices like tablets and smartphone penetration, less than half have that, low digital literacy and skills. Poverty and inequality was exacerbated because the haves were able to continue with their lives, but those who don't have were really, really badly affected. It has been a story of two halves, if you like, and two fortunes. And what we really want to talk about today is that what is it that we need to do to take advantage and leverage the growth in digital? What is it that we need to do to make sure that Africa does not miss out on the opportunities that comes with digitalization and with fourth industrial revolution? And what do we need to do to not only catch up, but to leapfrog some of the other infrastructure deficit that we have, and as shown, for instance, by the fintech, where we have one of the highest penetration of mobile money out of necessity because we didn't have banking infrastructure in Africa. Could this be our time? More importantly, how can all of us here as philanthropists do? What can we do? How can we help to really accelerate that? So to unpack this, let me turn to my panel. The way it's going to work is that I will ask a few questions to the panel, not many, because this conversation is about you, our audience. We want you to participate as much as you can. I'm inviting you to note your questions as the speakers are addressing us, and to engage in this conversation, because it's all about you. But just to get us started, I will ask a few questions, and then I will turn on to the audience for your own questions. So let's start off with our first panelist that I'd like to introduce, Thabo Katola. We welcome Thabo, and Thabo is the Managing Director of Lion Tutoring. It's 100% locally owned, local being in Botswana, that employs over 300 staff countrywide and regionally. Thabo has recently graced the cover of Forbes Africa magazine in April 2020. I'm so jealous. And he was listed as one of the top achievers 30 under 30 list. His company has won 3 awards in 2017, 18, and 19, talk about consistency, and it's voted the best youth-owned business in Botswana. They also operate in South Africa, which is Rustenburg and Johannesburg. So this business has an opportunity to become a true multinational. And Lion Tutoring is looking to take advantage of the fourth industrial revolution by engaging in a worldwide audience through their e-commerce platform and mobile applications. They have an app which, according to Thabo, it operates just like the Uber for tutors, and it has started to gain traction from the international market. So Thabo, since you're in education, I was wondering, would you say education is the answer to the challenge that I set out for Africa's 4IR readiness? If so, how does one educate people when there's such inequality and poverty, and therefore they might not afford to pay for this education? And there's not even enough learning infrastructure. And I know what you're going to say, because talk about the app, that digital platforms can be used to educate. But even there's a constraint because there's not enough smartphones or broadband penetration. How do we deal with this?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Mabunda. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, so basically, with coronavirus and our worldwide pandemic, like you said, it's the time that, everyone is going digital. We're looking into this COVID-19. It's a worldwide problem, really, that we're not just facing in Africa, but the whole world is facing this problem. So I think the main thing with the fourth industrial revolution, like you've said, education is the key. Because I was just studying all the other revolutions that we've had, the first to the third industrial revolutions, and all of them, the main pillar of the revolutions was education. You'll talk of the first one, where there was the steam engine, the second one, the electricity, the third, the telecommunications and electronics. All of those industrial revolutions were based on education, because you cannot operate a steam engine without any sort of education, knowledge, without any sort of training. So it's the same with the fourth industrial revolution that, it's actually tested now in 2020 with the COVID-19. We actually now see that people can actually work from home. People can actually perform site work at construction sites, at mines, from the comfort of their home. I was actually just blown away to see somebody operating a drone, operating a JCB from the comfort of their home. So all of these things, all of these revolutions, they have to be led, or they have to be pillared by education. And that is where we fall in, because with the fourth industrial revolution, kids start coding, children start writing code from the early ages of as early as 3 years old, that we've seen. They are started to program robots, to program computers to do things that they want them to do. So I I think education really is a pillar of this fourth industrial revolution. And like you're saying, it's very difficult in the African context to access our internet. I was just having a conversation with Bosun earlier on, and we were just talking of the limitations in our continent, that internet is not free and accessible to everyone. Even in its high expense, it's very slow internet. Most of the, like yesterday, I was having challenges with my internet, but I'm in Gaborone, and that is the capital city of Botswana. So in our African context, we really need people like yourself and myself, to actually the business community to hold hands with the government and say, let's make internet free for everyone. Let's make internet accessible to everyone. Yes, it comes at a cost, but it's a cost that through our donations, through our philanthropic ventures, we can be able to make it accessible to everyone.
Thank you very much. So your call is for philanthropists to get actively involved in seeing how internet can be made freely available, especially for those who cannot afford.
That is it, sir. That is it. I've seen also with our lockdowns, the students. Okay, I'm in the education, so I'll talk about students more often than not. The students that had internet access, their school calendar was not really affected. I mean, you can even attest in the case of South Africa. The students in the private schools, they were able to have their lessons on Zoom. They were able to interact with their teachers from the comfort of their homes. But the students in the public schools that, even if they do have a smartphone at home, you'll find the internet is really bad, or the school itself, the teacher, the principal, the head of department, they don't have those kind of resources to connect with the students. So it really, like I read an article where they said it widens the gap, between the rich and the poor. But if I take it now to the educational sector, it widens the gap between the haves and the have-nots. The students that
Yeah.
have high-speed internet, they're able to participate. The academic calendar is not taken back like a student in Mamelodi, or a
Yeah.
student in Garankuwa. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you very much, Tobo. So free education, free internet access for the poor. Excuse me. Let's move on to our next guest, Inyola Mafe, who is an international development leader currently with World Economic Forum. Her mission is to accelerate Africa's transformation and inclusive growth agenda. She currently leads the growth and development of 2030 Vision Initiative, focused on harnessing 4IR technologies to accelerate progress on the Sustainable Development Goals within the next decade. In partnership with UNDP, and more than 20 top technology companies, this platform provides the focal point to mobilize the concerted and cooperative efforts by technology companies, government, civil society, and international organizations. Inyola was named one of the top 100 women in Africa in 2018. She holds an MA from Georgetown University, School of Foreign Service in Washington, D.C., and a BA from Spelman College. So Inyola, in your view, given the work that you do, what are some of the key enablers that we need to have in place for Africa to be ready for 4IR faster advantage? What can philanthropists in particular do to help accelerate this readiness?
Thank you, and thank you for having me. We start off with an easy question, right? So especially in terms of the enablers, I think kind of setting the stage, and I think Tobo had mentioned some pieces that that operate at the micro level, at the individual institution or school level as well, and what are the needs of the people who are going to be using the technologies and why they're constrained. Maybe my comments will focus more on like the systems and the levers that can allow that to actually happen, for that to be, so it could be at cost, or you know, I may debate with my dear brother there about free, because we have to be able to subsidize it somewhere so it could be maintained. But you know, I don't want to get into the weeds, but I agree that there is a need for that to be low transaction costs for the end user at the end of the day. So let's kind of break it out, is that we're about 70% of the 167 targets that we have for the SDGs can be supported in technology innovation. And we know that about 10 out of the 17 goals could have a significant high impact from technology. So a conversation about technology and a conversation about SDGs need to be coupled and together, because those allow us with metrics on, at a higher level, and then what do individual countries do, because this has to be mediated through countries. And the impact of that and the importance of that for Africa, and what keeps me up at night in terms of the work that I and the team do, is how are we harnessing that in the service of the SDGs? So how are we supporting entrepreneurs and innovators like Bosun Tobo to be able to do what they do and match that with the kind of aggregator piece that actually gets us to scale? Because, and it touches the points that you talked about, the enablers. And I kind of talk about it in terms of a base layer approach, is what are the levers we need to have in place, knowing the constraints that we have. And I don't want to, I think we all know what many of the constraints are in the physical and even digital sense for, capacity sense for Africa. And that's also 50 plus countries, sovereign countries, who are still figuring out also how they harmonize with each other as well. So I'm making a broader statement here. When I think about kind of building those base layers, meaningful connectivity, and to take Tobo's points a little bit further, meaningful connectivity in an applied sense is going to be important. So that is that it's not just I'm on WhatsApp and I'm on Facebook for 5 minutes out of the day because that's all my data can provide. It is I'm actually helping my business. I'm finding more information for my farming practices and produce as a user, and that cost is embedded and not so high right now in terms of it. So in countries like my own, Nigeria, it could be about $100 in dollars to be able to even download videos and things like that. That's unacceptable and that's unsustainable. So the applied sense of connectivity is that it has to mean something. It has to drive to something. And I think the conversation we often have is that we need backbone infrastructure and that, and then, you know, everything else will figure itself out. And I think it's a conversation that we need to have broadly beyond telcos, beyond governments, and say, what are the different ways? And it's a very similar conversation we had with energy and renewables, where we said, okay, there's different distributed ways that we can provide energy to populations. Here are the different ways, and here are the different risk metrics associated with that. So we could drive costs down. So that would be one piece, is connectivity in a meaningful applied sense. Second would be data. We know that data is king, and there's value in data that can be shared across. And also the lack of data we have does not allow us as African governments, as African private sector, to adequately be able to understand our environment. We're missing data, we're missing maps, we're missing GIS information. And individual governments and private sector right now are burdening that cost, both in time, energy, and money, to find data for them to be able to do business, for them to be able to do anything in the digital or even in the physical sense. So we know that 90% of all data was created in the last 2 years. We know some of it is latent within private sector. We know some of it is latent within public sector. And what we need is interoperability and mechanisms that can capture that data out and make it useful towards decision-making more broadly. But there's different governance ways that we can do it. So I don't want to go into those details or make this sound very easy, because we would have been able to do it by now. But I think that's another area that we certainly need, that is an enabler. So if we're able to unlock data and make it, use the data from kind of an evolved, old, linear kind of model to focusing on efficiency and best kind of decision-making type of models and utilizing mechanisms like smart contracts, interoperable systems, platforms that have multi-purpose, can be a bit of a marketplace for data. Those types of things can be done. And then I would say fundamentally, we can't innovate ourselves in the digital sense out of a mindset that is still in the second or third industrial. We can't build a fourth when there are still holes within our second and third. And we were talking to Bosun earlier, so I'm kind of stealing some of his thunder here because he mentioned this as well, but he goes into it in more detail than I could ever do. So I wanted to just mention those pieces, which is that the leadership and the skills in the leadership that we need by our governments, by our private sector to be able to do that, supported by the connectivity and data piece, I think are going to be really key. And then, so what does that mean for philanthropy, right? Philanthropy has historically provided support and hope in areas that are ideally non-commercial. They address vulnerable populations. They address issues that are not in the interest, quote unquote, of business historically. I think that creates a really important spot because there's parts of data, parts of connectivity, parts of leadership capacity building that are non-commercial. They just are, as I say, the base layer. They need to be invested in, but there's not a very clear, like, I'm going to get X amount of money from this. There's a societal value, but there may not be a direct monetary value. And I think that's the place for philanthropy to play. And they can do so in ways that they have to change their mindset in terms of providing more patient capital, knowing that examples exist within Rockefeller, Omidyar, and others in their approach in trying to unlock areas of focus. So I'll keep it there and just maybe leave the rest for discussion.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I'm sorry to rush you, but I need to allow enough time for audience participation. Thank you so much for that, Nyola. Now, I'd like to introduce our final member of the panel, Bosun. His name has been mentioned a couple of times, so it looks like we're all looking forward to hear what you have to say. He's the co-founder and chief executive of Co-Creation Hub, which is the Pan-African innovation enabler that works in the forefront of accelerating application innovation and social capital for better society. Bosun's an innovation expert on a mission to drive application of science, technology for enterprise and economic prosperity across Africa. Under his leadership, CC Hub has driven the growth of social innovation and technology across the continent, winning many, many awards across the board. It's in Rwanda, it's in Nairobi, and of course, he's also been acknowledged as one of the 100 most influential people in the continent by New Africa magazine. Bosun holds a master's degree in information system and management from Warwick University and is currently concluding up a doctoral degree or program in innovation system at University of Lancaster in the UK. So welcome, Bosun. I suppose, this concept of innovation hub, many people reference Silicon Valley and the success, and it's been replicated in Europe, in Israel, and so on. And of course, in many versions within Africa, trying to drive that startup culture and starting new industries to leverage for IR. So I know that even with CC Hub, you're doing something like that. And of course, it should make sense in Africa because we've got so much creativity in our talent and youthful population. But I don't know if many or any Africa unicorns. Is there a barrier? What's happening in there? Or is this concept just overplayed and it's not really delivering what we're expecting? What is it that philanthropists can do to really help turn the corner? Because I do think we need startups in technology and for IR to create breakthrough. But I'm not sure, I may be wrong, but I haven't seen it coming through. What's your view?
Impeni, thank you. I think to answer your question, yes, you're totally wrong. I think that's the answer to your question. So we live at a time when the world is going through a significant change, and I think Africa needs to recognize that. We jump on the bandwagon of the fourth industrial revolution, and it sounds extremely exciting for us to discuss. But the reality is this is a revolution that is disrupting humanity significantly. From the way we live our daily lives to, if this was last year, we'll probably all be in a location somewhere in Africa having this conference. We won't be having it over Zoom. So from the way we live our lives to the way we conduct business, to the way we interact with family members, to the way our kids are now learning, and unfortunately for the world, we then saw a coronavirus that popped up from nowhere and accelerated the fourth industrial revolution beyond our level of preparedness. So I think if you take that perspective, you then need to also use that perspective to understand what the business environment is like today. So a lot of us are looking at the digital space and entrepreneurship in the digital space from the prism of the United Nations, where the currency there is unicorn. How many businesses have you built that are now billion-dollar businesses? But the reality is we live at a time where these businesses are disrupting society. And the questions that we need to be asking in Africa is, are we preparing, or how well prepared are we to be able to leverage digital entrepreneurship to accelerate development in key sectors on the continent? How smartly are we using digital technology to leapfrog payment, for instance, on the continent? We just saw a Nigerian payment company that was acquired by an American company for $200 million US. But we're still looking for unicorn. That's quite significant, by the way. But we're still looking for unicorn, which is a wrong metric. And it's not just the only company. There's also Flutterwave in Nigeria as well. So there are two significant companies, using digital to disrupt payment. And I think the question we should be asking is, as a continent, what are we doing to ensure that we can capture the value that is coming out of this revolution for ourselves to drive prosperity, but also to ensure that there's posterity behind how we're participating in it? And that's a very deep question, and it's not for everybody, to be honest. It's not for everybody. But what I have to say on it is that the competitiveness of nation and continent is now deeply rooted in all this digital innovation that you're seeing. You can see countries going to war on 5G. It's not a joke, it's serious. So even wars amongst nations is going to be fought on this digital infrastructure. Competitiveness of economies is going to be based on this digital infrastructure. And what we're seeing is that our people are building this new economy on the continent, but we're not honing them. We're not owning this economy. So a lot of the companies that you see that are being built are being honed by investors from outside of Africa. And what that means is that the critical infrastructure that we're building that we need to keep on the continent, because our investors don't have a solid understanding of how this market operates, they're late to the markets to invest. So the investment that is driving the revolution is coming from outside of the continent. So people from outside are not worried about the fact that there's no African unicorn. Of course, you can't expect African unicorn to come in less than 10 years. The startup ecosystem in Africa is just about 10 years old. Africa did not finish to catch up with the third industrial revolution before the fourth came. So what we should worry about is more the ownership of our market, which we're not seeing. And I think this is where philanthropists are important in the whole equation. The current landscape for technology startup on the continent, for instance, wasn't seeded by African money. If you're pointing at philanthropies who seeded the current innovation ecosystem, startup ecosystem on the African continent, it was the likes of a media network, the likes of Acumen, who put money behind these things. Then you saw investors from the US and Europe as well coming to put money. We were very fortunate to have people like Tony Elumelu Foundation also then chipping in along the line. But we've not seen enough of this. And what we need to understand is that the digital revolution is not only attractive, it's not only going to take Africa out of, the current state to where we want to be. It's also going to be what we use to protect our future. So if we don't invest in it, we're going to struggle. And just lastly, I know we're short of time, to pick on what Eniola mentioned, which is the fact that in this space, the way you invest, and it's not even about the fact that you need patient capital that needs to go into digital technologies and digital revolution, a capital that can see the long term, right? You're building infrastructure that literally becomes the backbone of economies. That's the future. Payments is going to be digital. Education will be digital. Commerce is already digital. These things take time. So we do need people on the continent with resources who are able to wait 5-10 years before they can see returns on their investment. And that's what we're not seeing enough of. And I think that's where philanthropists can now start to use their money, not for free, but to use their money, this patient capital, to help spur the development and innovation that we need to see on the continent.
So thank you for that, Buson. I guess just bringing you all in, we talk about democratization of access, that connectivity, right? And yet there isn't enough money, so to speak. There are philanthropists and whatever, but we live in constrained environment, especially now as we go post-COVID, where many private sector players are experiencing downturn in terms of the economy and therefore their revenues, and so do governments. With unemployment rising and so on, their collections of taxes is reducing, and therefore they don't have enough money. So the notion of free internet or build infrastructure and make it available for free, I'm not sure that's practical. So if that is the constraint, even with all of the money we might have, is there a prioritization or layering of how you actually deploy these resources if you can't make it available everywhere? How do you think about that?
Yeah, I think let me take that one. Maybe I think I stepped on the wrong toes, because even Eniola was killing me that it's not practical. But I think that's where we come in as a philanthropist, because it's up to us, to help the government. Government, unlike us, people in the business sector, government are not pushed by profits. We are pushed by profits. And for people to subscribe, for instance, for my app, we need to make sure that people are connected to the internet. That's why you get the Zuckerbergs, the Bill Gates, they're trying to put funds to get every single person connected to the internet, because they understand that the time that we live in right now, internet is like air, connectivity is like air. If you don't have internet connectivity, some people are actually forced out of jobs just because they cannot work from home. And it's by circumstances that, the COVID-19 has really now poked the holes now to expose us to say, how can you work from home? For instance, if you are, like I was giving an example in the civil, if you are working in a construction site, they've made it now possible that if you're working on a construction site, you can operate a JCB truck at the comfort of your home through the technologies. So yes, I do agree with the both of you that, it's not practical, but it's up to us now to hold hands as people in the private sector, with the government. I've actually seen that it's actually possible. In our country, we've seen the internet costs on the first lockdown that was slashed by half. The second lockdown that was slashed by half. Now you've got at least, even in the capital city, everyone is connected to the internet. And people in the rural communities, at least we've seen rises of people in the rural communities connected to the internet. Why? Because, the private sector together with the government held hands.
Okay. And are you confident that some of the moves like this whole data line or internet line that the consortium of Facebook, Google, and some of the network operators like MTN and Vodacom, I think they're putting together a high-speed line called To Africa Connection Project. Is that enough? And because you mentioned Zuckerberg and all of that, they've been talking about creating free internet zones. Are those the right moves, or you're calling out for other things?
Those are the right moves. We are a step in the right direction. Just to give the others an opportunity to talk, we can't, Rome was not built
Sure.
in a day. But I think, with the current, lockdowns, they've come together, the MTNs, the Vodacoms, the Mascom in my country, by Strive Masiwa, they've come together, they slash the data cost, step in the right direction.
All right. And let me bring in Inola here. From a regulation point of view, though, because some of the criticism is that governments have been slow in our continent to create an enabling environment from a regulation point of view. One of the examples cited is the release of spectrum. For example, the granting of licenses to the network operators and others. Lots of red tape. What are you finding? Is that starting to improve? What are the barriers there? Do governments understand enough the importance of this from a policy point of view?
In short, no and yes. So you saw in the US or at least in the Americas, you saw private sector was driving regulation because it went extremely fast from Silicon Valley and other places, and then government caught up, but also government became a partner. You saw like DARPA and others with the support of government to provide the base layer. I hate to use it, but I'll be the base layer queen, I don't mind. In Europe, you're seeing it very individualist. So you're seeing that GDPR was this blanket regulation because of the EU base layer of integration that provided support to the individuals. Asia was very much, and driven by China, was very much government driven. So it's with government regulations and then private sector responds. In Africa, mostly you see that it's actually innovators and entrepreneurs like Tobo and Bosum who had provided distributed regulatory systems in a sense out of a dearth of regulation. So fintech that others have mentioned, that grew in Nigeria, for example, and also to some extent in Kenya, with a lack of regulation. Government was not aware that these things were happening, so they were able to build. And then there was a catch up. I think we've got to reduce that catch up period where there are mechanisms like policy sandboxes and others that can close the gap. I think what happens is that regulation becomes a punishment rather than a partnership. And I think that it is reactionary in the sense of we don't understand what's going on, it's scaring us, we've got to put in some regulations in places, or we've got to tax the companies that are doing this because we want to capture some value. But there's so much more nuanced ways that you can use. If you only see it as a problem that you need to contain, then to the points that are being made, digital is not able to expand exponentially. By the virtue of how digital works, it is exponential. So I think that the role for governments to play is to reduce the gap between private sector and innovation and themselves. And that means, cross-fertilizing private sector into government, which is happening in some countries to some extent, is having those kind of policy sandboxes where you're sitting alongside private sector to look at issues that the private sector is dealing with and say, okay, here are the ways that government can work with. And then also not being a competitor to private sector, but being a partner. So there's a sense of government is in the business of regulation. Regulation is not a business. It is a enabling environment. So I think if we're able to get to that point, there's real opportunities for governments to be partners of the innovation story rather than a very dual carriageway that never ever connects.
Okay. Sorry. So thank you so much, Buson. I think one of the things that keeps on sometimes being stated almost as an argument against digitalization and fourth industrial revolution, which I don't think you can stop anyway. It's the negative use of it, like for spreading fake news. And in vulnerable and quite sensitive markets and countries like ours, where some of our markets were having come out of wars so far, a long time ago, there's still conflict. There's a fear that this gets used in the wrong way. And certainly I've lived in countries where even internet gets switched off a day or two before elections or in election day and so on. And of course, you then talk about the fake news, but you also talk about cyber attacks. Even in South Africa, I mean, there are banks where, there were attacks. I mean, if you can attack a bank and people's names get stolen and so on, that's a big concern, right? Is that slowing us down? Is that going to start to get better? Because there's fear around this cloud world. You're on mute.
Yeah, so sadly we don't have a lot of time on this call, but I think you're eating on something that is extremely important. When I started with your last question, I mentioned how this is not just an opportunity for business. It's also a national security issue. Is where competitiveness of nations will come from. By its nature, the current technologies that we're talking about, because they connect humans to human, they connect humans to machine, they give us opportunity to process data in manners that we've not been able to before. They do come with a lot of risk and danger. And the only thing you can take out of it is that in well-organized societies, humanity is always able to self-organize and manage things like this. And I think this is where the danger is for Africa. And I think that's where opportunity lies for philanthropists, that we shouldn't look at this as something that is just out there that young people are using to create value and it can help us change the continent. But our ability to also use it positively would rely on what Eniola was alluding to around policy, which is our ability to also constantly understand how this technology is evolving and to then empower policymakers to be able to appreciate what their role needs to be in that whole ecosystem to support innovation on one hand to happen, but also protect our market and our people as well. And the fact is that it's not only in Africa, government world over is struggling with understanding digital technologies and the evolution and its uses. You've seen how it was used to disrupt elections in the US, almighty United States. They couldn't even stand up to it. So let alone in Africa. If you follow the development in Nigeria last week, you will probably see how this technology has been used both positively to mobilize people, but also negatively on what you were saying about fake news. Fake news in real sense to cause disruption, or fake news in real sense to cause confusion. So when you look at all of these, as a society, we cannot just look at these technologies and feel like we don't have a choice, that we have to listen to what people tell us from outside of our continent. We do need people with resources on the African continent to also start to invest in how we understand this technology. The conversation on whether internet should be free or not, it's something that is open. There's no right or wrong perspective to it. Right? You can look at it from a business perspective, but the likes of companies like Facebook and Google that are investing in making it available, they're not stupid, because when you make internet available for free, what it means is that everyone is connected, your market becomes bigger. But the reason why we worry about it being free in Africa is because we don't have the resources to make it free. But in the more developed world, people are already thinking of, is internet a right, or luxury? But it's a right, because if you have it, if it's affordable, your business opportunity will become bigger. And that's the reality.
Fantastic.
So we do need philanthropists in all of these areas.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much. And just to remind our audience, we will have time to just take 2 or 3 questions. So I do hope you have them lined up. As you can hear, our panel is such an expert panel. They've got so much opinion and expertise. So it will be a pity to not take advantage of this power panel we have. Also to remind you that when we finish here, the conversation continues on social media, all the social media platforms for Africa Philanthropy Forum. And also within that, please look for GoFundMe account because this is about philanthropy. So we welcome your contribution in any currency, but just give to the cause so that we can continue with the great work. Let me just check with our facilitator operator, whether there's any questions. I'm not able to see anything on the chat here, but do we have any questions or ability for people to? Okay, Samantha says there's no questions that came through on the chat. Are there any questions that people want to have live to raise the hand or something so that we can engage? The panel has said a lot, and I would imagine that people want to probe into some of those. Doesn't seem like there's any questions coming in right now. So I'll just ask one more question to the panel and then we'll wrap up. I suppose the question for me, and I'm a business, I'm a businessman, right? And it's about what's the business case and to prioritize for IR from a philanthropist point of view, because there's many other people talking to them about food. You know, there's poverty and hunger, people dying of hunger. There's health, you know, people not having medicine, and so on. There's shortage of infrastructure, roads, electricity. Where do you start? And you know, because we've got more needs than there's money. And what is the business case for 4IR?
So, sorry, guys, I would like to go first on that one because of the way you framed the question. You see, in Africa, we're very poor with dealing with wicked problems. And you know, the challenge with wicked problems is that their requirement is constantly changing, right? So you mentioned some of them, poverty, education, no road. You mentioned all those things. And typically what we do is we play catch up on them. And by the time you fix each one of them, you quickly realize that, whoa, the requirement is gone. So you've not solved the problem. If you take education, for instance, you're still building classes, you're still training teachers and mass, and you're still doing all of this. You think you're solving the problem, you're investing the meager resources that we have. Then in 5 years' time, you quickly realize that kids don't want to learn the way we're currently teaching them in Africa. The way kids want to learn is changed. You realize that the future of work and work is actually totally different, that the sort of people that the workforce is looking for is not what our education system is producing. Then you quickly realize that public health is different. You quickly realize that, you know, infrastructure, the way you build infrastructure is different. If I quickly use a good example, in Rwanda, there's a company that is using drones to move medical supplies, for instance. If you're still trying to move medical supplies the whole way, you realize in 5 years' time that that's archaic and is not efficient. So I think what we need to be thinking of whenever we talk about business case is actually long-term. Business cases, how do we build a solid business case around this new reality of ours such that Africa is not going to be left behind and all our businesses in 5 years' time will be dying? Because in 5 years' time, the core infrastructure for business will be digital fully. And these digital businesses, if we're not building them and investing in them on the continent, other people will build them from outside of the continent. And you know, the biggest danger now is that we've signed up to a single market on the continent. So it's going to be a lot easier for one company to come from the US or China and comb through the entire African continent. And so we're going to be losing out. So that is the business case. The business case is not short term, it's medium term. How do we protect our competitiveness as people?
Yeah, and I guess to add to that, actually, my experience with digital infrastructure is that it can help solve the other problems that I've mentioned. So how do you then, through 4IR, actually help better access for healthcare, like virtual consulting instead of going to the hospital, or digital education instead of building the classrooms that you don't have money to build? So I think it's integrated.
And I think there's a real opportunity there, as I see it and our work sees it, technology or digital transformation is simply the process to achieve the points of the wicked problems that we are trying to address. So it's an enabler, it's a tool. And so those who are able to understand the tool and are in the closest proximity to Africa's issues, which is African companies and African governments and African civil society, I think there's that ecosystem that African ecosystem enabled by digital transformation and the digital tools and the frontier technologies, supported by that base layer of connectivity, data, regulation, and enabling environment. That's the lever. That's the bit that kind of gets to that exponential. So we start seeing the possibilities of addressing education, not in a 2 or 3 industrial revolution way, but in a forward-thinking way. And just let you into a secret, it's already happening. There are innovators and entrepreneurs who are thinking this way. What we're saying is we need that to be wholesale across the board, and for us to have new models, new thinking, not even new models, capture that thinking and make it scalable, we're all kind of the velocity of the philanthropy, and I mean that really, the rate and the speed in the in the same direction. If we can flow all of that in the same converging direction, I think that's the way that it is. And that's easier said than done, but that's kind of where, as a system thinker, and the work that we do at 2030 Vision is what is going to shape the 2030 Vision Africa. I'm beyond 2020 at this point.
Fantastic. Yeah, but you're absolutely right, because it is about longer term vision, recognizing and realizing that this will take time. There's no point of rushing and frustrating ourselves if we need more time to realize the vision, as long as we stay true to the vision. That's fantastic. I'm going to now ask for your closing comments as we wrap up. Unfortunately, the questions from the audience aren't coming through. We have a bit of a shy audience, and maybe we should ask them to ask the questions before in future, but I hear that they are enjoying the conversation. Let's start with Tobo. And please, the time is tight, so I'll give you 45 seconds. Closing comment. 1 minute maximum.
Okay. Yeah, well, I just want to close by, thanking everyone, Bosun, Yola, and Yimpini. I think we've had, discussions, and, I think these discussions, they will have a snowball effect in us to just come together, and get our continent to sort of lead the space. I've seen with countries like Kenya, where they would innovate and get something like M-Pesa, which is, it's a worldwide case study, So I think it's up to us now for us to not only look for aid, aid from the Europeans, aid from the Americans, but, let us lead this fourth industrial revolution. Let us actually give something to the world that they can actually buy from us. I know one of our, somebody that I always listen to, Vusi Tembekwayo, he always says, Africa needs less aid and more trade, and it's conversations similar to what we've had today that will actually enable the African continent to trade more, to be on top of the fourth industrial revolution, to lead, when it comes to issues of technology, issues, we need Africans to solve our African problems. So I really thank you, and I thank APF for this amazing platform. Botswana is rising, Africa is rising, Nigeria is rising, South Africa is rising. So, let us do business with one another, let us empower one another as Africans and give something to the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Africa rising. That's the message. Amazing. Buson, let's come to you. In terms of your thoughts, your final thoughts in this.
No, thanks,
Closing thoughts.
I think final thought is that we're living at an exciting time in the world. You know, one where barrier to the ability of nations to take advantage of this new set of technologies it's not as huge as it used to be. But unfortunately, the key requirement is in being intentional. I think you have to be intentional. You have to be able to use your capital and resources with clear intentions. There's no shortcut to it.
Yeah.
Absolutely no shortcut to it. And the danger with this new set of technology is that those who are able to be intentional about how they invest in it and how they capture value, they're always going to be the one at the top. And for that, it threatens the sovereignty of so many nations who are unable to be intentional about it. So we do need leadership in Africa, and the sort of leadership we need is not just from within government. We need government to demonstrate leadership, but we also do need leadership from the private sector as well. We need entrepreneurs who understand that this is about the future. It's not just about gains and returns only, but it's about being able to build businesses that can also protect the sovereignty and the market of Africa. And we do need the philanthropists as well, people who appreciate the fact that we have to protect our societies and our nations. And these people can help invest and bring capital that is long-term and strategic to the table to help leapfrog quickly. Eniola mentioned this. This is already happening, but the challenge is that we don't have enough resources on the continent to power what is happening. So we need the philanthropists also to step in.
Yeah, I mean, those are very powerful points. Thank you about leadership, but also private sector involvement for sustainability. Because quite often you want to leave it to the public sector, but actually, if people aren't connected and moving forward, and the private sector doesn't play a role, then you don't have customers, right? Who are thriving, and if your customer base is not thriving, your business will die. So help the country to help yourself. Powerful message. I deliberately left Eniola last because they say save the best for last. And also, no offense, gentlemen, but also we also had to be thankful to her for bringing diversity into this panel, because if it wasn't for her, we had a danger of 100% male panel, and I wasn't gonna take that. And we need to make sure next time is at least 50-50 with gender representation. So, Eniola, thank you so much. Your closing thoughts, please.
No, thank you. Thank you to the panelists. I think this is a great conversation and definitely conversation starter. So hopefully we can take this on. I can already know the different ways I can bug you. So I work primarily on the connective tissue, the aggregator. How do we scale? Our project does not operate in the countries. We don't do that well, so we don't play in that world. There's way too many entities that do that really well. So I think there's a lot of convergence that can happen. One government, one private sector cannot do this alone, and we need that connective tissue between them. Consider 2030 Vision one of those connective tissue mechanisms and platforms to be able to do that in ways that we can scale up and scale out. So the types of frameworks, the scenario planning, all of those pieces I think are really important. And that's a place for philanthropy to play. So I've said that one of them is around patient capital, which I think we're agreeing on to drive down the transaction costs and ideally get to a point, to Tobo's point, where it's almost free. Like these are rights to individual users, so that even taps into the system itself, and then also catalytic. So like not just because it's right, but because it could be catalyzing other things to come into play. We need more pay stacks, more flutter waves, more entities like that. So that's my spot, and I'll leave it.
Thank you so much. We're out of time completely, but thank you for being a fantastic panel and for all of your contribution. Enjoy the rest of your day.